Hello learners and viewers, welcome to this session. Today's topic is gender and water. This topic is part of the course MGS001, MGSE006 and MGSE042. You all must be the learners enrolled in Master's Program in Gender and Development Studies and Certificate Program in Gender, Agriculture and Sustainable Development. You all must be already aware about what is common property resources and natural resource management. Specifically, today we will discuss about the relationship between gender and water. Objective of this session is to demonstrate the gender inequities in the water sector, analyze water issue as a women's issue, evaluate the different approaches with regard to gender and water issues, and describe water as a livelihood issues. First, let us start with why there is an inequities in the water sector. What is the relationship between the gender and water? You all must be knowing that all over the world, women are seen to share the special relationship with water. And how could they get that special relationship? Specifically, they could be able to understand the socio-cultural and life-sustaining values. Like other parts of the world, India is also, it's not an exception. Specifically, women across caste, class and locations, they have a special relationship with the water issues, and specifically the women from the rural areas and tribal India. You must have seen in some films and other documentaries, specifically in 1980s and 1970s, the women, they used to walk for a mile just to fetch one pot of water. Now it has changed a lot. The government also has implemented various policies, programs to make the access to water for women and other marginalized communities. Whenever we talk about the specifically on common property resources or natural resources, there is a framework to understand these resources. That is how far women and marginalized communities, they have an access to control over these issues. Like when we talk about the specifically water as an issues, irrespective of whether it's a macro level, micro level or meso level, next important issue with regard to access and control, that women rarely participate in decision making levels. For example, if it's come to micro level, you all must be read and some of you must have experienced, there is a water users committee. In that water users committee, since there is a mandatory for the women or 33% reservation for any committees, so most of the women either they have co-opted or sometimes the women became part of the committee, but when it comes to decision making, rarely they actively participate and take the decision with regard to water issues. So let us first understand the gender inequities in the water sector, why these inequities emerged over a period of time, how we could able to address these inequities. What are the factors that determine women's access to water, and why do we need to understand these things specifically to address these inequities? For example, very significant factor that play a significant role with regard to access is that location, caste, class, these are the important factors will come to our mind when we talk about the access to water. Socio-technical and production relations that play a significant role with regard to access to water. And when we talk about the access to water, social stratification that exists across caste, class and gender and ethnic groups or other minorities that manifest in every aspect of social life, and water is not an exception, that we need to understand. Second significant points we need to discuss here is that ownership of land, that how it is associated with technology and access to common property resources. When we talk about the access to water for production, it is mediated through the ownership of land or the technology to pump the water. Specifically here, we discuss about the rural India. When we talk about the rural India, the land ownership largely rests with men. So access to water for women is also mediated through the male members in the society. That is with regard to land owning class. When it comes to landless, specifically landless women, there are two issues when we talk about the landless. One is that for their own consumption, second one is there for livelihood purpose. So here class and gender intersect and mediate to access water. Statistics also we could able to see that class specifically intersects with the caste when it comes to ownership of the production of resources. Thereby it perpetuates the inequity across class, caste and gender. Third important point here we need to discuss is that open access to resources. When we talk about the water is it's a open access resources. Now we were discussing about the ownership of land specifically in the context of rural areas. Now we need to discuss about the access to water in the urban areas. Here in urban areas, access to water markets water is it's a commodity. Most of the time it became a commodity, and how the market sell this product as a commodity means if someone in urban areas, if they could able to pay and negotiate and they get the unrestricted access to water resources. If they are not able to pay and access to water resources, it's difficult for them to use those particular resources. Here also, in the urban context also, there is a social inequities do inhibit access to water. So this access control over the water resources, it manifests in a various manner and bring gender inequities. For example, in a domestic sphere, always we expect women to collect water, and they are the responsible for fulfilling the needs of the entire family members. Since all of you are enrolled in Gender and Development Studies and Certificate Program in Gender, Agriculture and Sustainable Development, you all already must be understood what is gender roles, how the roles are performed in the society due to the existing socialization process. Due to the performance of the gender roles, what happens is that their needs also differs. And these needs we have differentiated. There is a strategic gender needs and practical gender needs. This water comes under the practical gender needs, and it is a basic resource for the sustenance of the human beings. But to address these basic needs, the government has also formulated many policies from 1980s onwards and implemented it. Since 1980s, human beings, specifically when we talk about the Indian context, the access to water has been increased among many areas. But still, to get the water for the domestic purposes, specifically for the family, many times the little girls, they have to quit the school to collect the water and assist their mothers in this household task that require a lot of time. As per Water Aid quote, I quote, it is estimated that over 10 million person years are spent by women and female children carrying water from distant sources every year, I unquote. Then we could able to understand the enormous efforts put by the women to collect the water. Next one is that who collects the water for household purposes. There is a study conducted by the UNICEF almost 15 years ago. Now there is a little progress with regard to this. data, women's role in water collection varies with the age as follows. Women between 15 to 30 years of age, they collect 63.6% of household water. Okay, the age between 15 to 30 years, they collect most of the water for household usage. Then women between the age 36 to 50 years, around 16.2% of the water they collect for household purposes. Women above 15 years, they collect only 2% for the household purposes. If the women less than 15 years, they collect around 4% of the water for household purposes. Men, only 14% they collect water for the household purposes. Looking at this data, we could able to see that how much efforts the women are putting to collect the water for household purposes. Then when we talk about the access or control over water, drinking water and other domestic water is considered as I have already mentioned, it's part of the welfare measures. By assuming it is the welfare measures, government as well as other agencies, they have implemented various policies, as well as since the women predominantly involved in collecting the large percentage of the water for household purpose, they have an equal access to domestic water. Here the question is not about the access to domestic water. There is an how this access is mediated through various socio-economic and other cultural factors, and why the women from certain class, caste and location have a limited access to water for the household purpose. That is the main issue we need to discuss. Once they collected, when it comes to domestic purposes in a private space, both men and women have an equal access to water resources, since the women, they expected to collect water for the domestic purposes. And within the various class and caste too, we see the discrimination among women in using the water also. When it comes to decision making, that's what in the beginning itself, in the introduction itself, I told you. We are in the age of globalization and market economy. In the market economy, most of the common properties are marketized, and when it comes to using the same CPR for commercial purposes, like for agricultural use or for producing the commercial crops, then there is a limited access. So to use the water in a limited manner, most of the gram panchayats at the rural level as well as urban level, there is a water user committees. So in this water user committee, we need to make women as a legitimate participant to participate in the water user committee, and whatever decisions these water user committee they take, it's supposed to address the concerns of the women, since the women mostly participate in the collection of the water for the domestic purpose. There is one example I could able to quote here, that the recent study done in Maharashtra showed that only 11% of the women were members of the water user associations for irrigation, and only 3 women could be selected to be on the decision making bodies of the water user association. By looking at this data, we could able to understand that even water users association, the women, they have a limited role, or women, they may not be allowed to participate actively to take decisions. Next one is when it comes to knowledge in the water sector, which still so dominated by technology, and now as I have said that because of the institutional management of the water bodies, like institution means at the rural level, mostly the gram panchayats, most of the water bodies may be under the control of the gram panchayats, or some of the water bodies may be under the control of the state governments. When it comes to bigger water bodies, maybe state level or at the central level, the government will take care of the water bodies. So the management has been institutionalized. In this institutionalized structure, the knowledge of the poor are the users of the water. Who are all the users of the water? Mostly the women are the users of the water. Their knowledge is not considered as important. That we need to understand that. For example, women's knowledge regarding the different sources fit for drinking water is often not valued in the planning process. Next important thing, we have given what are the factors play a significant role when it comes to access and control over the water by the women members. Next important point here we need to understand is that why water is also a women issue. That is why do we need to study, and why do we need to understand or contextualize water is a gender issue. So first point here we need to bring is that women spend considerable amount of time in work and activities around water, both in domestic and productive spheres. That is the first point. Second one is that women's access to and control over water resources is very limited despite the amount of work they do around water. That is the second. Third one is that women's participation in decision making too is limited, as they are not the members of the key decision making bodies, and so thus very few women actively or they may be part of the planning process at the micro, meso or macro level. Even if the few women, if they are part of the decision making bodies, their points may not be considered when it comes to planning process. Next important point is that women, since they work always around water, both domestic as well as public spheres, but they must be possessing lots of knowledge and experience with regard to water sector. But these knowledge and experience are rarely valued in water resource and planning and management. So what is the existing assumptions? Why do we specifically in the planning process, why are they not considering women as knowledgeable partners as far as water resources are considered? The assumption is that women are nurturers and caretakers, so women's relationship with water is therefore understood as a special, and the belief that all women across diverse groups have a better understanding of the health and hygiene needs of the household. That is the first thing. Second one is that since the women are considered as an torch bearers of health and hygiene needs of the household, even the women, they are expected to be maintaining the toilets and public hygiene also. So when it comes to water, means it doesn't mean that only it's for consumption purposes. The women, they work around the water and various activities they play with regard to water. Next one is that whether women's role are static. Basically, the time spent on collection of water for domestic use has actually, if they spend more time on collecting the water for the domestic use, what happened is that they may not be, it may not be possible for the women to spend on productive activities. So their significant period to do productive activities must be lost due to the time spent on collection of the water. Second, static notion of women's role in survival tasks. Like for example, there is an again and again due to the existing socialization process, as well as we are again and again perpetuating the gender roles that the women, they expected to do certain kinds of care activities that is related to reproductive roles. It's not only like rearing of the children, take care of the entire household, take care of the elders and other members in the society. Since we are perpetuating these gender roles again and again, the women, they are expected to collect the water. That is not only it is survival needs of the women, it is the survival needs of the entire family members. In case of the water, what happened is that since we are again and again perpetuating gender roles, there is a clear spheres, that is, one is domestic spheres, other one is productive spheres. Because of the role differentiations, the women expect to be part of the domestic spheres, and all the male members, they are expected to be part of the productive spheres. Then they could be able to go out, they spend considerable time for productive activities. Since the women, they spend lots of their time in domestic sphere, it may not be possible for them to be part of the productive activities. Then women as a contented members of the household. This is the another assumption. There is a vast body of literature that points to intra-household differences in access to resources like land, water, food, healthcare, and other decision-making process. This was clearly brought by the study carried out by the Dr. Beena Agarwal and Dr. Naila Kabir. So any scheme or government programs targets the household as an homogeneous unit, and always there is an existing assumption is that women, when we talk about or when we say women, most of the time they are considered as an homogeneous unit with little recognition that there is an intra-household conflicts and differences, as well as when we talk about the women, it is not, they are not the homogeneous category. There is a difference among women also. The women belong to urban areas, their needs may be different. Women belong to rural areas, their needs may be different. So based on the location, caste, class, the needs may be different. Those difference, most of the time in the planning process, they may not be considering these differences, and they consider, first one is that they consider women as an homogeneous category. So whatever the policies planning they make, they make for the women, they consider women as a homogeneous category and they make the policies. Second one is that most of the time in the planning process, we rarely accept the existing intra-household conflicts and differences. That is the important thing we need to understand. That next significant assumption is that even government, other bodies, they consider women as a beneficiaries rather than partners. And most of the time, if they make any policies and they viewed women as a beneficiaries, and their participation is rarely considered, often reduced as an labor utilization. For example, we could able to see that even if there is any drought, then the women became part of the drought relief work. And when government or semi-government or any organization, if they want to consult with the communities, they rarely consult with women. Consultation with communities means then they consult only with male members, because the existing assumption is that male are the head of the households and the community leaders. If they discuss with the male members in the society, the assumption is that they could able to address the needs of the entire community. That is totally, it is misconceptualized. So that misconception needs to be studied and it needs to be changed. Another important thing is that water is not only for consumption purposes, it is the important resources for livelihood purposes. One must understand the livelihood. Since early 90s, the concept of livelihood, and more specifically sustainable livelihood, has entered in the discourse of the rural development. Robert Chamber has been one of the key proponents of this idea. According to Robert Chamber, livelihood is, I quote, comprising the capabilities, assert and activities required for the means of living. A livelihood is sustainable when it can cope with and recover from stresses and shocks and maintain or enhance its capabilities and asserts both now and in the future, while not undermining the natural resource base. I unquote. We have discussed the issues related to gender and water. In this, after discussing here, the important point is that we need to conceptualizing women. It is a question of changing the entire worldview surrounding women, their interests, their perceptions, their ways of negotiating for access. In an earlier section, like in this lecture also, we have seen how women are conceptualized and how this conceptualization shapes the water policy as well. So we need to bring a new understanding about women. Therefore, we can critically look into the water sector, specifically water sector, other common property resources also, to go further and integrate women into the particular sector. That is very important. Another important point is that water has always been acknowledged as an important resource, and that changes and enhances the value of land manifold. And almost all conventionally accepted norms have looked at water rights as linked to landholding rights. If someone has having a landholding, they could able to access the water also. It's important for the government to rethink about the landholding, and already the laws are there that women also equally, they have an access to ancestral property. Still, this needs to be reconceptualized. We have to view in a different way, and we need to see who has the dominant rights over water. Once we see who has the dominant rights over the water, we have to reconceptualize those aspects, and we need to integrate women, marginalized and other sections of the society. Hope you could able to understand the significance of water as a resources, how it manifests, and how what is the relationship between gender and water. In the next session, we will discuss further about the other common property resources. Thank you so much for listening this session. Happy learning.